Okay, Baba Yaga here, and I would like to welcome you to You Learn on Delta. So, we're going to cover what is Delta, why we would use Delta, what it tells us, and then look at some chart examples of how we can deploy it into our trading. Delta is a primary way that I make decisions as I'm trading. It is in a larger context, in a much bigger picture. It can also be useful to develop areas of interest or places to initiate trades. For this sake of this video, we're going to be focusing on how to use Delta to execute. So why Delta, or what is Delta? Delta, quite simply, is the volume of that's trading at the ask minus the volume of trade that's trading at the bid. That equation gives you Delta. In options, you have this Greek of delta, which is it's the same general idea. In that context, delta is the sensitivity of the options contract to a $1 move up or down in the underlying securities price. Um, for futures trading, it is similar in that when delta is created, which meaning when we have a difference in that's substantial between the ask price volume and the bid price volume, somebody is potentially made a mistake. Somebody is potentially offsides. Somebody's right and somebody's wrong. And the more delta present, the more volatile the situation can become. So we use delta. It lets us see behind the candles. It lets us see inside the order flow to see what's happening. It lets us see that in these charts. It lets us see that without having to stare at a footprint chart, or sorry, without having to stare at a DOM or time and sales to see that. So again, delta being the difference of at bid, at offer, at ask, at bid trades. Um, it gives us a picture as to who may be vulnerable. You can see it many different ways. Again, you can see it on the DOM if you're sharp and you pick up on when someone is loading the bid and absorbing or soaking sellers. You can see that delta would be building in a scenario like that. An iceberg order creates delta most of the time, almost all the time. You don't have to have delta; it's not magic, but it is crucial for me in how I choose to execute in the markets. You can see delta from a simple graph like this that shows the difference in bid ask volume. Um, and this will be tied directly to what type of candle you're displaying. So this chart is displaying 750 volume. So 750 volume traded here and made positive delta tied to a specific amount or a threshold. These bars being colored, they're colored based on the amount of delta present, either positive for green, negative for red. Nothing magical about that. This is a order. This is these are ordered, or these candle colorings are ordered or created just off color bar alerts. Again, nothing magic tied to this. So let's pull this. Actually, we'll leave these up. I normally have these hidden. I don't look at these during the day because I have these candles painting. This over here is showing a 15-second picture of delta. So we have volume based delta and regulated by time based delta. Um, and it can tell different stories. It can tell the same story. One sometimes will tell the story first or second. One can lead the other. I like to see it regulated with volume, so you get speed and pace. And then I like to see it regulated with time because you get this cumulative effect. And then on a very small time frame of 15 seconds, it can be pretty powerful. Um, so you can also see it using a footprint chart, bid ask candles. There's other indicators other than this one. You can use a number bar calculator like this to show you the bid ask difference in a given subset or a given picture of candles, depending on what you're looking at. This is half the size candle of this. So this is 750. This is half that. And then this is compressed a little bit just to tidy it up. And this shows delta blue as buy delta and orange as sell delta. One of the things I look for on this chart is all sell delta in a candle like this one, or all buy delta in a candle like this one. And that tells you that somebody with intent was buying pretty aggressively for the whole size of this candle. Um, Here's another great example, all buy delta, and you see a nice move out. So um, you can use a footprint chart like that. You can use this. You can use other indicators. This chart's labeled work in progress because I've been playing around with some stuff on it that I currently have hidden. Um, but yeah, so those are all the ways you can see delta. But again, delta is not magic, and that's the main thing here. Delta is not a magical thing. Delta is just another tool. No one owns it's not proprietary in any way. It's not like a study that somebody owns, of delta. There is many different ways to view delta. Many different people have put a lot of work into how to visualize delta to give you an advantage. So, how do I use delta? That's the only thing that I can really speak to with much authority or experience, because um, I'm the one doing this video. So, um, the way that I like to use delta is to take an entry. So let's talk about two types of entries that I would take. One type of entry would be an area of interest that's soft. So a soft area of interest is an area where I have identified a potential market moving situation through other tools or resources, but it's not super strong. It's a place that if I were in a trade coming into that area, I would be looking to take profit. So that would be one way to look at that type of area. But let's say I wasn't in a trade, or I'd already closed the trade out and we were coming into an area that was a light area of interest. I would not just blindly buy or sell a line that I have on my chart. But what I would do is pay close attention to delta as we entered that area, and let delta confirm for me the potential bias that I may hold about that area. Like, I think that area may be a place to take a long, and then delta comes along in that zone and kind of confirms that the market agrees, and the market is taking longs there. And so then I can lean on that information garnered to pull the trigger on a trade, and then use it to help me manage risk. So let's do an example of that. That um, let's just say that well, for sake of this little story, let's just say that this was an area of interest. Let's say that in theory, this was a light area of interest. Price came in selling, um, light selling, but selling nonetheless. A little more aggressive if these bars are cumulative perspective by looking at time instead of just volume, but aggressive selling in immediately met by fairly aggressive buying out. That could be, if I had a light area of interest where I wanted to be long, that could be enough in theory to make me pull the trigger and participate in this move up. Let's say that the idea was to traverse OR for 20 points and then see what we could get out of it. So then, as I used not a blind price level but delta to confirm that we had sellers come in, not get much for it, and buyers meet them there, at least on the and from a volume in the volume chart, I could pull the trigger, or I could wait for the 15-second to also tell that story. In this candle here, where we got buyers, be a market participant at 432 roughly for a long through OR and a push to the top, which would have played out. It would be a small points trade, but again, the trade could have been initiated just off of this if I had an area of interest. So if we just came down in here with gray bars, nothing happened, that would have just been a trade that was just no setup. And I think it's important to distinguish between places we pull the trigger and places we don't. Where do we have the confirmation to get into a trade, and where do we not have confirmation and opportunity to get into a trade? And you have to lean on something. And so, for the sake of this example, we're saying that we had nothing but delta to look at. Let me mention one moment that these bubbles are just showing at market orders. So this is someone who threw 31 lots market buy on the high. Um, Not related to delta necessarily, although it can create delta, as you could imagine, based on how those orders got filled and how it came through. But um, so that's an example of letting delta guide you if you have an area of interest. Let's say you so that and that's one way of applying it. So that's I have an area of interest I'm not confident in just to pull the trigger on blindly. I want to let delta confirm, and I would say that's a really great way to use delta. Again, if you don't have an area of interest and you're just going to blindly buy whenever this is green and blindly sell whenever this is red, that is not the way that to be profitable, and that's not the way to use this tool. This tool is to add context to an area you've already identified. Okay, there are ways to use this tool to get you into a trade in quote unquote no man's land, and I'll show you what those extreme situations look like. But that's an example of how to use delta to get into a trade where you have a light area of interest. Let's talk about this was Friday the 13th, so just this past Friday. Um, in the room, we identified, or I mentioned, I think a lot of us talked about the overnight high. I mentioned it from a TPO perspective that it was a poor high, um, based on the fact that there was not any excess there, and it was just it was nasty. It needed to be cleaned up. And there's also a common thing that happens where we peak above overnight high, and then we gain no traction, and we walk back a large portion of the move that brought us there. So those two things being true of the 35.75 area on Friday, I identified that as a place that I was willing to pull the trigger, basically to give that trade a shot, um, while not really waiting for delta to confirm, not waiting for order flow to confirm. I was innovating, which can be dangerous on a trend day. It's not advised to just innovate often, but it was a trade idea that I had that I felt confident in, so I was price risking. Meaning, when we hit 35.75, I put a market order on with a bracket, stop loss, and bracketed exits, and wanted to see what happened. But what's cool is, as I was getting ready to do that, Delta began to confirm for me that sellers were present in this area, which was great. I was already going to price risk, but I pulled the trigger, and then Delta confirmed that there were sellers present and that buyers, even though very aggressive, were not able to continue this move at that point. You also see it here on the 15-second. This aggressive sell pops in. You actually get 3 candles of aggressive sell, but only one through the threshold that would color the bar. And again, these colored candles are just referencing this grid and coloring appropriate, based on color bar alerts and the colors that I chose. So I entered this trade. I think my first target was like 504. So I wanted to see that push back, which we got here. And let's talk about using Delta to reoffer. So we offered this and moved away. We reoffered into this sell Delta here. So I didn't have to innovate. I could have been patient and waited for this delta to get reoffered and then risked off those sellers. Um, Also, that presented itself here, risking off this heavy sell delta. Um, so you can use delta to reoffer a place that was previously sold if it was aggressive and if it was near an area of interest. So again, it doesn't have to be just for initiating trades. It could be used to you could use it, or not innovate a trade, but you could use it to reoffer or rebid a trade, or rebid to get into a trade. You could also use it to add to a trade. Selling here, covering part at 504, and then leaning on this delta, reoffering, adding back to the position, pulling stops down in front of these sellers, imagining in theory that we'd want to see good, strong continuation out of this little congestion, which we got. So that's another way to use it. Add to a trade, rebid, reoffer to get into a trade. And then we come down into here, and it can also help you guide and take in profit. When we start to see this type of activity, which again, I know this is this video about Delta, but this is also there's also large volume trades getting executed in here. I did not have a quote unquote area of interest at 464 or 460 or 476. My area of interest was actually just above OR 444, which was my third target. I think I was down to two runners at this point. I think my second target was in the 76 range, somewhere in here. So I'm in this short and I start to see this, which they don't really get anything for it, roll back over, make new lows. But then we come into this light orange, which you can see here, you can see here, you can see here. That light orange is incredibly aggressive sellers. And when we began to see this activity come in on the on Delta without continuing to make lower lows, that's a big red flag for being in a short position. When sellers come in that strong, we want to see follow through pretty quick. We want to see them get what they're trying to get, right? We want to see that follow through to new lows. And when that starts to not happen, what the story that tells of Delta is that these guys, again, there's exposure there. There's potential to unwind against them. So you have to be really careful. My line in the sand for this trade was 80 to 84. Once I saw this come in, I said out in the chat, if we get back above 84 or back above 80 with any push, this short's dead, and we're walking that move back, which is what happened. There was so much absorption here. Sellers were trying really hard, couldn't make it happen, and this turns around and runs against you. So when you think of managing a trade, using Delta to manage a trade. The original theory on this trade was those two targets, 504 and 470, 472, 476, and then 44, and then a traverse of OR. That was like the original plan. This changed the plan. So Delta can help to guide you in taking profit and placing stops, because if this gets going the other way with all of this fuel, um, there's not a short to be had on the other side of it, at least not with regard to the next 15, 20, 30 points. So if I were going to trade Friday afternoon, which I typically do not do, but if I were, this would have been a flatten up and reconsider the opportunity to get long. And again, when we talk about rebidding Delta, aggressive sell Delta, aggressive sell Delta, aggressive sell Delta, super aggressive sell Delta, sell Delta, sell Delta, sell Delta, rebidding these sellers when that gets the opportunity again and risking just off this low, that's a great setup. And that would be an example of letting Delta innovate a trade setup for you. Again, with the large trade orders kind of helping really paint the picture. But that is a great example. I don't have an area of interest here. My plan was to short through all of this. But wow, someone else had a different plan and they had the bullets to fire to make that plan happen. So I can abandon my plan and jump on board with this plan. And so that's a way to let Delta, again, around a soft area of interest. Delta can help you get into a trade by confirming for you a bias that you may hold to that area, whether that's long or short. Delta can confirm a trade when you're just innovating, when you're just price risking off a key level that you're very strong in, that you feel very strongly in. Delta can, once you pull the trigger and then you see Delta confirm, that's really helpful. Delta can help guide you in stop placement, again, with regard to this trade that we were just talking about and wanting to stop out above 80 to 84 because I felt like the trade was dead above that because they got stuffed. Delta can guide you in initiating a new trade. Now, we don't see this type of setup every single day, but as you watch Delta on your charts and get used to it, this becomes something that when you see that stands out. That's like an order flow anomaly, right? And you're like, whoa, I want to be a part of that. And then you get these buyers stepping in, are really aggressive, whether that was stops off of these people or whether that was new buyers in the market. We just know that there were buyers there, right? And again, the beauty of looking at this through the picture of volume and time is these four bars were painted off of this bar because I have some cross painting from levels that are very extreme on the 750 volume. Will paint over here to this, even if they're not showing up on the 15-second picture, which I think is kind of why I keep both of them around. Because sometimes one tells the story, the other doesn't. But Delta again can help you innovate into a new trade idea or thesis when you get those type of anomalies. Um, Lastly, it can help you with taking profit. As you see this all unfolding, you want to be closing out that short because of this stall. Or maybe you're in along here and you see aggressive selling coming in here, and maybe you peel off some of your trade with those guys. There's just so many ways to use Delta to your advantage as a trader. Again, it is not magic. It's not the end all be all. It's not the only thing I use. But when it comes to pulling the trigger around an area of interest, I love to see Delta confirm that. I hope you found this to be helpful and insightful. If you have any questions about, you know, how to apply Delta to your specific trading style, how to incorporate it, I'd be glad to answer them in Discord. Send me a message, tag me. Um, I'd be glad to explain in more detail the thresholds that I'm using on my charts and how I got to them. Be glad to help in any way I can, and I hope that you're able to take this and incorporate it into your trading style. I was not the first person to discover Delta. Someone else explained it to me once upon a time. And I have taken that and incorporated it into my style, and I use it on a daily basis for execution decisions. As you'll find with most things in trading, no one really came up with it. People stumbled onto it and shared it, and people reimagine it and reapply it in their own ways. So, hope you find this helpful. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.